We don't have a crystal ball, so it's quite hard to say that your forecast is going to be right. It's your forecast right now, and it is likely to be changed. And that's why, you look at forecasts dependent on the nature of the business and the situation of the business. They have to be fluid. They might require weekly manipulation. They might require monthly. It might be quarterly. And obviously, you might set out your 5-year business plan at any given stage, but obviously drivers in that business are going to change. So it might be right for right now, but it's not going to be right 6 months necessarily down the line.
Before we start today's episode, I want to address a common challenge I have observed with FP&A professionals. While Excel skills are abundant, many are not fully tapping into Power BI's capabilities to enhance their financial analysis skills. With over a decade of experience in FP&A consulting and countless training sessions conducted, my most loved training by FP&A professionals, hands down, has been my Introduction to Power BI for Financial Analysts. So, for my loyal podcast listeners, I am giving you free access to it today. Check out the link in the description below to upgrade your FP&A skills today. Thank you. Hello and welcome to FP&A Unboxed Podcast, where we dive into real stories and challenges from finance leaders. I am Tejas Parikh. I'm the founder of Akshar Business Consulting Limited and your host for this FP&A Unboxed Podcast. Today, we'll be talking to Gemma Doran about basically FP&A in small and medium-sized businesses, who will share her experience across. Gemma is a fractional portfolio CFO with the CFO Centre, and she specializes in leisure and hospitality industries in growth and treasury management and debt and equity fundraising. CFO Centre itself is actually a business with 750 plus CFO specialists from various backgrounds across the world. So tell us more about your experience with the CFO Centre, Gemma, and overall your time with medium-sized and small businesses.
And I've only recently just joined the CFO Centre. I joined back in May. The CFO Centre has been around for over 20 years. It was originally founded by Colin Mills. It's a family-run business, and Colin was a full-time CFO. And he, I think like many of the people who work at the CFO Centre, wanted to maybe have a little bit of a rebalance between sort of life and leisure. And it was quite pioneering 20 plus years ago. But I think, in this day and age, movement towards fractional CFOs or fractional finance is really becoming the norm, particularly in the sort of SME world and startups where, there isn't the financial resource to be able to have full-time employees. But so, the CFO Centre then is ideally a place to satisfy that ongoing and increasing trend, really.
Yeah, no, and I think even in the SME space, right, even though you don't need a CFO 5 days a week, but a couple of days or 1 day a week, having that strategic conversation and having that value added, somebody to provide you in direction with the finances is actually very valuable. So it's not just good for the CFOs, but I think it is pivotal for the businesses as well, isn't it?
I think so. And I think, having perhaps someone who isn't in the business 5 days a week, there's that kind of fresh pair of eyes. I think you can be a little bit more objective because you're not so immersed in the situation. So I think it can be. And, we can play many a role. You listed out some of the areas where my expertise is, but, we can go in and maybe mentor an FD or a financial controller as well. So I think, the move towards fractional CFO or fractional any role, to be honest, it is definitely likely to increase, particularly when you've got all of these other sort of macroeconomic factors going on in the background, increasing employee costs here in the UK with increases in national insurance. It's no wonder that people are moving towards a more fractional employment structure.
No, definitely. I definitely agree with that one. So from that perspective, right, your work with how do you pronounce this one? Save Technology.
No, I'm working. That was last year, and that wasn't through the CFO Centre. I'm now working for a company called Azetico, who are a gift card loyalty program at the moment. But in general, my background has been SME. So, for example, Savia was complete startup. But over the course of my career, I've been CFO for entities anywhere between startup through to 100 million when I left Cult Wines a couple of years ago.
Sure. So basically, you on your LinkedIn and everywhere, you talk about balancing optimism with realism in forecasting. So in businesses like a complete startup or the one that you're working with right now, how do you build FP&A models that reflect the ambition and yet remain basically grounded in realities of where the business is, right? Because you need to balance optimism with make sure it's realistic.
I kind of coined a phrase called targeted realism, really, because obviously you need to consider what the purpose of the forecasting for. Have you secured investment? Are you looking for investment? Who are the stakeholders? Who are you looking to? But I think the key thing is that, you need to build a model that is totally flexible. This really highlights the importance of sensitivity analysis and scenario planning, really. And you need to have a model that, is flexible enough to do that. And again, I know I've just mentioned it, but, particularly against, these macroeconomic factors. For example, a few years ago when I was at Cult Wines and Brexit and, US tariffs and things like that, it has to be quite dynamic. So I think, your model needs to be robust. It needs to be totally defendable. But I mean, if you're looking for investment, you're going to have to show that there's element of growth there. But you need to have all of the factors and all of the arguments against why you do believe that the case of where your expectations are going. That being said, I'm a big proponent of, as most people would be, of sensitivity analysis and scenario planning.
Yeah. So then in that scenario, right? I mean, what are your thoughts around basically driver-based budgeting? Because I'm a very big supporter of driver-based budgeting because for me to do sensitivity analysis or to do scenarios, essentially what is a scenario? I change a few drivers and see the outcome and things like that.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. It is all about driver budgeting. And I think sort of, maybe it's something we'll touch on in a few questions times, but that driver analysis has to come from within the business. And it's really important that you get business partners within the business to buy into that as well. So that's incredibly important. It's not, just for me to make up the drivers in the business. It needs to be not top down, not bottom up. It just needs to be fully collaborative, to be brutally honest.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, drivers made up by finance that I think the productivity is going to be this is respectfully nonsensical.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
don't know. I mean, I've spent my time, I've spoken to warehouse managers and I've spoken to basically, truck drivers, people who literally do the logistics, truck deliveries and things like that. Boss, they know so much more than we do. We will never know.
Absolutely. And, and I think it helps improve motivation and, going back to the realism, if they are the people that have given the inputs into driving, then they're the ones that, realistically know the factors that are going to potentially affect your forecast. So I think it's imperative that you get business partner buy-in.
Yeah, I mean engagement, right? I mean, critical word, it is a word thrown around everywhere all the time, but you get engagement when you get inputs from the right people, then they are engaged. They are vetted into the success of that driver. Otherwise, it's a challenge, right? So when building or expanding a FP&A function in a SME environment, what core skills or mindsets do you look for as a CFO, right? I mean, you working as a CFO in this environment, given that it is very fast-paced and chaotic.
It is, and I think not going to sort of back to the fractional role is as well. Whether me in a fractional role or whether if I'm building FP&A function, which could also be a fractional role. I think what you've said is being dynamic is clearly really important because this person potentially is going to have to work under supervision or with or without supervision. So they need to have a good grasp of the business, and they need to be able to be proactive, but also really reactive as well. And going back to the point about the drivers, because they could change, at a very fast pace. So it is someone who needs to be able to work in a fast paced environment, who needs to be structured. But also, I think, they need to understand the business as well. And I think that is not to be underestimated. It's all very well having a very experienced analyst who, can build you an all singing, all dancing model. But they need to understand those drivers. And again, based on that, I think then they need to be a good communicator as well, because they're the person that needs to understand the variables that are going into a model, and they're going to have to ask questions. And also, even if they're not going to be the end person making the presentation to investors or C-suite members or what have you, they will need to communicate to me or someone else who is going to present that model. So, I fully understand, what has gone in there and the reasons for, I don't know, any kind of a form of assumption, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, and be able to question that, right? I mean, be able to question, negotiate.
Absolutely.
And understand the trends behind it. Otherwise, what's the...
I think so. And, they need to be able to challenge someone like myself, and if they've spoken to another business partner within the company, and I'm saying, oh no, logistics costs last year were X percentage of turnover, so why are you flatlining, or why are they going up so much? You tell me, and challenge my expectation.
Yeah, no, exactly, and come up with a logical argument. It may not even always be right. I think one of the things I would like to get on record, I think a lot of people basically misunderstand what forecasting and budgeting is. They try to say it should be right. I say no, it needs to be logical. Could be wrong. It's more often than not it's wrong.
At the end of the day, we don't have a crystal ball, so it's quite hard to say that your forecast is going to be right. It's your forecast right now, and it is likely to be changed. And that's why, you look at forecasts dependent on the nature of the business and the situation of the business. They have to be fluid. They might require weekly manipulation. They might require monthly. It might be quarterly. And obviously, you might set out your 5-year business plan at any given stage, but obviously drivers in that business are going to change. So it might be right for right now, but it's not going to be right 6 months necessarily down the line.
Yeah, exactly. So FP&A visualizations, metrics, and storytelling approaches have proven effective, right? When winning trust from stakeholders and things like that. So what techniques have worked for you the best from an SME environment, and what do you think actually helps the business owners make decisions faster?
I think it comes back to that sort of, being logical and realistic. I think in SMEs, any decision is almost magnified because of the impact it's going to have on the size of the business. So I really do feel that, and it all depends where the business is in its life cycle, what's going in the sort of more macroeconomic climate, because, if we're forecasting a downturn in performance, for, I don't know, tariff restrictions or what have you, then, your model has to be able to speak to that. And, not be naively unrealistic to suggest that, there's going to be minimal impact by anything like that. And, I think the key thing is that the model speaks to who's going to be the end user. So, if it's someone, highly financial, then obviously you can have a model that may be slightly more sophisticated. If it's being presented to some maybe non-financial users, then, just pick some highlights out and maybe use more visuals, which are a lot more pleasing on the eye than, just rows and rows of P&L columns or balance sheet columns. So I think it's really important. And, it doesn't have to be, particularly in startups, in SMEs, there's varying levels of budget and resource that can be invested in these models. So, invariably, most of my models have been Excel based. We haven't got the benefit of, new AI cloud-based techniques. But at the end of the day, they need to be reliable, they need to be accurate, and they need to be targeted to who the end user of that is going to be. And I think it's really important that, that they are, underpinned by this sort of targeted logic, targeted realism of what you want to, and make sure that the metrics or visuals that you do use, if you choose to use some visuals, they're kind of relevant, because, I've not myself, but I've seen some presentations where perhaps, the visuals, they might look pretty, but they're not really relevant to the numbers that are being presented.
Yeah, no, I mean, so again, that actually brings us to the next kind of topic on conversation, right? You mentioned clear communication, and you've just mentioned basically relevance of visualization to the story that is being told and things like that. Do you mind sharing the story, right? I mean, okay, we don't want particular names of business
No,
names.
I won't mention names.
But story of when it's gone wrong or when it's gone right. I mean, both are equally as welcome, right?
Gosh, there was a story that someone told me, and that they were very early on in their career, and they had attempted to build a model, and it was quite theoretical, and some of the drivers that they'd put into the P&L model were just totally not relevant to the business. So the business carried a loan, but it was non-interest bearing. But in the P&L, there was an interest line, and I questioned why there was. And I was told that, well, in the models that they'd looked at, there was always interest. And I was like, this was quite a junior person. And I said, well, there's only interest if you've got something that is bearing interest. So I suppose that was how not to produce a financial model. But I think it's all got to be very joined up. And, particularly in SMEs where I go in, and actually on a fractional basis as well, because you're often going in to help them improve their reporting. So, in a longer term strategic aim, it can support fundraise. But so, often there's sort of management information packs on monthly, and, probably need to be a little bit more sophisticated. So if you are, showing in your MI pack every month that for whatever reason marketing's going off, then, add more KPIs in that talk around sales and marketing. Is your cost of acquisition going up? Or actually, often one that a lot of people forget is the cost of maintaining a customer increasing as well. So I think, it's a narrative. It's telling the story, bearing in mind who you're telling the story to. But, it's not just a production of a P&L, a balance sheet, a cash flow. It's showing those drivers again. So if your marketing is going up, well, you show that your cost of acquisition or your cost of maintenance is increasing and it's because of X, Y, and Z. So I think, as well, it needs to then have someone who is in the position, and not just me, but, person who is in charge of constructing the model to really have very good, robust communication skills to, as we just spoken about, to have the confidence to be able to challenge maybe the expectation, to be the person that goes out to talk to the other people within the businesses as well. And, then it's nice to have some of these visuals that we've just spoken about potentially to then, enhance the story. But it's not just all about, the fundamentals of the P&L, the balance sheet and the cash flow. It's sort of building out a slightly more sophisticated KPI dashboard or whatever. So you've got that in business intelligence to be able to make those decisions.
No, definitely. I mean, it is clear, right? Otherwise, it becomes a bit more finance driven rather than basically KPI driven, which is KPI driven makes more sense than finance driven. So definitely. Yeah. You've highlighted the importance of micro level cash flow control in SMEs, right? So how does that influence your day-to-day FP&A tactics and finance-led decision making?
It's challenging. I'm not going to lie, particularly in some SMEs when treasury management is key, to be honest, because it can be quite hand to mouth. So again, and I think the importance is that it has to be flexible, because often you are looking at a cash flow, for example, on a daily basis. So it's really important that it's got all of those drivers. It's got your sales, it's got your purchases, it's got any payment terms or payment plan terms that you might have agreed with suppliers or, HMRC. It's got accurate payment terms for customers. It's got, agreed payment terms for suppliers. So again, it needs to be a really flexible model. So, it can be changed with any driver can be easily fed into this model, because it needs to be so dynamic that it needs to change on a daily basis. And, it can be hard when you're using Excel, but often, that's the only resource because of, cash constraints that's available to you. So I think, it needs to be flexible. It needs to be very usable as well, because the last thing you're doing if you are needing to be reactive on a daily basis is, having a model that takes, a couple of hours to update, because you've got so many different things to input into it. So it needs to be flexible and usable and have all of the accurate drivers, so it's not missing anything. I mean, at the end of the day, when you're having to use things like Excel, I mean, unfortunately, but again, if you are using more sophisticated FP&A tools, it's the quality of the output is only as good as the quality of the input.
No, I completely agree. I mean, these tools are essentially a pipeline through which you flow the data and the water.
Absolutely.
If the water is dirty, then the output is going to be dirty.
Absolutely.
You can't do anything.
Definitely. I like that analogy. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah, I was telling somebody this morning, I was like, if you want me to tell you that the AI is going to solve your data challenges, then let me disappoint you and tell you now it's not going to solve your data problems. It's going to highlight them more, but it's not going to solve them.
No, exactly.
Yeah, because people tend to think that AI is going to be some sort of a magic, Harry Potter's wand, and it's all going to disappear.
I think you're right. I think they think that you can input whatever, and the quality of the input or the accuracy of the input doesn't have to be that great. And then AI is going to churn something out that is going to answer all your solutions. It's suddenly going to improve the quality of the input, and so the output is accurate. And unfortunately, that is not the case.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I mean, well-educated finance people have these kind of conversations. It's very funny. I find it hilarious, honestly. So, what tools or reporting cadences support the level of cash visibility without adding excessive overheads, according to you?
I think this is quite hard, actually, because, I mean, like you say, I mean, a lot of people put cadence on AI, but, that isn't necessarily the case. And I don't actually think you necessarily have to have, sophisticated software. You just have to have a model that is consistently accurate, and like we're saying, it's right for right now. And when I say accurate, I mean the inputs going in are accurate. We don't know whether what's, can happen, down the line to change that. But, I think, that comes also down to the person who's obviously undertaking the work. And what I would say, I think what underlines the cadence is, don't underestimate the time you have to spend on building the model, that initial investment, be it Excel or software based or what have you. Don't rush that. You need to invest the time in building that model, because it doesn't matter whether it is Excel or it is some more sophisticated tool. Just spend that time in building and ensuring the accuracy of the model. And then I think, to be honest, that's sufficient and enough to be honest. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of not rushing the build phase of a model. And I do think people, particularly when people are under pressure, you need to raise money potentially in a quick turnaround time. But there's no point rushing the initial investment in time on building this model, because I can guarantee you the people that you'll be sending this model will be the first to pick and critique it. So make sure you do spend that time. And I know it's hard potentially managing a business owner's expectations when they want a model churned out within, I don't know, a week or what have you. And it's important that you do spend the time in the build and then spend the time talking to those people, so you've got accurate drivers being put into that model.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, if you get your foundations wrong, then you're going to be torn apart very quickly by the investors.
Absolutely.
But they will drive a truck through those holes.
Absolutely.
I have seen it myself. So
yeah,
I know
indeed. Me too, as well. So I think manage business owners' expectations that, getting the underlying model absolutely watertight will future-proof against any investor being able to pick holes in it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, rushing the foundations is absolutely the wrong thing to do, rather than investing time in it. But anyway, so how do you structure a rolling forecast to stay responsive in a rapid shifting, especially SME direction, when things change overnight? I mean, I have to highlight, right? I mean, tariffs is a very good example. Now, recently, it looked like, okay, they are going to bomb the Middle East, and now today morning they have announced already that, okay, there is a peace, and there is going to be basically ceasefire. I mean, you're like, what the hell? Are you fighting or are you not fighting? Make up your mind, man. I mean, seriously. I mean, nobody wants you to fight, but it's a bit tricky.
It's so challenging. And I think I've kind of just sort of semi-spoken around it. You need to have a model that's just very easy to use and can be reactive to literally changes within 24 hours. You know, like you say, I thought we were on the brink of full scale sort of war. And now, you know, we're talking about ceasefires and peace negotiations and things. So I think also, though, it's knowing what to adapt to what shit is as well. So I think, you know, sometimes there could be a tendency to rush into changing things. So I think it's really hard, but finding that balance to know when you need to potentially update something, because otherwise you could be reacting literally every 24 hours and you won't know whether, you know, what you're coming or doing. But I think, you know, as I said, it's really important to make sure that you have a model that's very easy to use, that requires very little change to, you know, then show any sensitivities or what have you, because otherwise, if it's overly complex, like I said, you know, you could spend 2 hours making the changes and then, you know, things have changed again and you've got to spend another 2 hours. So I think it's having a model that's just very flexible and easy to manipulate for any changes that need to be made.
I mean, now that actually has dropped the question which is not on our script, so I'll ask you that one. Forecasting and modeling, right? Art or a science?
Oh, I think it's both, actually. I think there's a science to the technical side of it, but I think there's an art to knowing what drivers to put into it. And also, I suppose maybe that's an art knowing when to change it and maybe when to just hold on and see how it plays, or maybe just come up with another scenario, but don't necessarily change your original. So I'm going to sit on the fence and say both.
Yeah, no, well, I am on the fence with you then. I do feel there is the art and a science. There is a science of how you structure it, but it's the art of how you use the tool, right? And if you don't know the art to use the tool, then you are not going to be doing a very good job with it. So I
No,
agree.
100%.
Okay, so three standard questions, right, which I've asked all my podcast guests. Where do you think is the future of FP&A in 3 to 5 years? You're not allowed to say AI because, as we agreed, AI is not going to solve anything. So let's not say AI. So, what do you think is the future of FP&A in next 3 to 5 years?
I think it needs to continue to tell a story. It's not just the numbers, it's the story of where the business is going, why the business is going in that direction. And obviously the numbers, you know, play a part of that. But I think it can just add so much more value. And I think, you know, in a growing trend of various different things going on in the macro economy, I think it's really important that, you know, models reflect that. So, you know, there's been a lot of change in terms of, you know, your production of your financial statements. You now need to have sort of an emissions statement. So I think, you know, in terms of modelling, I think perhaps in the future there is going to need to be more strategic sort of decision making based around ESG, environmental, social governance. So I think models are going to have to, and I'm not saying I've got the answer, but I think models are just going to have to maybe think about those type of things more than perhaps they do at the moment.
What is the one thing that most FP&A functions need help with today that will help them become better strategic finance business partners?
I think it's, I was struggling with this one a little bit. I think it's just knowing the business. I think you have to immerse yourself in the business. I know when I was sort of, you know, very junior in my career, it was almost like I can work 9 till 5, I get out. And then as I've got older, and I suppose that does come with, you know, when you take slightly more senior positions. But looking back now, I think I was quite naive at some point early on in my career, because I think you only really fully understand the business when you take the opportunity to immerse yourself in it. So even if you might just be the person who's responsible. You're actually incredibly important, because how do you know to work on those numbers, and how do you know to sensitize those numbers if you don't know what something could do within the impact the business? So I think it's really is that need to understand the business and really roll your sleeves up and get involved in that business. I think, even now there's still quite a finance gap leveled at being quite remote part of a business, and in the roles, and even in a fractional role, actually, you've really got to have the mentality that you are part of that business. You've got to interact. And it's quite interesting, actually. I was at the CFO annual conference a couple of weeks ago, and Zara Dorr, who's our group CEO, she came up with this concept of renters and owners. And most people, so you're in a block of flats, and you would expect the owners who own their flats to be more invested in their flat and the building rather than the renters. But actually, you can adopt that mentality. Just because I work on a fractional basis, and therefore I might be seen to be a renter, I'm actually want to be invested in that business. So I'm thought of more as an owner. And I think that's a really, really clever concept to think about. So, finance aren't renters, whether they're fractional, permanent, part-time, or what have you. We're owners too. So I think it's really important to invest the time in fully understanding the business. Go to speak to other business department. And I know when you're new, and if you're slightly more junior, that can be moderately terrifying. But I really think the quality of the output in the end will be so much more improved.
Oh, definitely. So for someone who is looking to move into finance, into FP&A recently, or somebody who's recently started, okay, what is one skill and one certification or qualification you think they should have for them to be successful in their early FP&A career?
I am the ACA chartered, so my recommendation would be that, because I feel, and this is no disrespect to any of the others, was the right choice for me, and it's the one I'm most familiar with. So I'm probably the biggest proponent of that. Another skill, and we've spoken about it, you have to be dynamic. You have to be able to work in a fast-paced environment, even in an SME, probably more so in a way, because there's so many things that can affect you, and they're probably more magnified as well. So being able to be structured and working in a fast-paced environment.
Perfect. Cool. Any closing thoughts?
No, I just think an area of finance not to be underestimated, to be honest. And, like I said, I think it's really important that the time investment goes into this area, because it does underpin all of the more macro strategic decision making. So I think, podcasts like this actually sort of, bringing awareness to the importance of are really good.
Thank you so much, Gemma. Thank you so much for your time and your sharing your thoughts and experiences with us. I think that's been really, really appreciated. And I'm sure people will learn a lot out of this one. So thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.